Before we begin, a lot of you have been noticing and wondering why I've been growing a beard, and I think I'll just quickly throw this out there and let you know. It's in relation to the short film that's being made for my novel. If you've been watching my content as of late, you've probably noticed me mentioning it, and thank you to everyone who's donated. We've reached the minimum goal, so that's really, really exciting. We do hope to raise more. I mean, we can make the movie, but that's going to be on the tightest budget. Basically, no one will be getting paid for it. And even if we can raise more, we'll be investing that into the quality, and we're all kind of just doing this because it's a passion project, so still not getting paid, but we really do want to try and raise more. So if you're in a position to donate, that would be brilliant, because I'm going to be playing a part in the short film as well, hence me growing the beard, because the character I'll be playing has a beard in the book. The character is Detective Dane. He has a very small role in the book, but it's actually one of the more prominent scenes of the short film, and I'll be doing that. So, we'll be able to test out my acting ability. And also, what you might have noticed as well, is I have rather, I think it's pretty cool. It's a different kind of beard. It's a tri-coloured beard. I got brown, and I've outed myself now and everyone knows I'm actually a hidden ginger. Don't know what that says about my soul, but yeah, ginger, brown, and also grey. That's where I'm greying as well. So, secrets being revealed on Shad's facial hair. So, anyway, that's why I'm growing it. And a lot of you be saying it looks all right. I'm not a good judge on these things, but many of you are encouraging me to keep it, so who knows. Anyway, we'll get to that topic of the video. But once again, please do go support the Kickstarter for the short film if you're in a position to do so. Reproductions is going to be endeavouring to the best of their ability to make something awesome.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and recently good old Excalibur had inadvertently roasted me about one of the swords I owned. He didn't know he was doing it, but it was pretty done. I found it funny, and I even made a video response.
Low quality, dysfunctional, wall hanger piece of junk that has been floating around on the market for probably decades at this point.
Go and check it out. It's a short one, but that's my response there. Yet after that response, it's brought up a very interesting topic and opportunity about the nature of sword design. Now, the sword in question is this. It's actually a very common, or dare I say famous, wall hanger. They're called wall hangers because, funnily enough, they're swords that are made to hang on the wall and look pretty. They're not meant to be functional. And this is kind of the perfect example of a sword that is made to do that exact thing. It's not functional. In fact, there are a lot of errors in its design that make this pretty horrendous. And this is why it's such an interesting topic, and hence the topic of this video, is that a lot of people are completely unaware of what those are. And if you are aware of them, can you see the potential in this? Because there are very attractive elements about this sword. There's a reason, my wife bought it for me as a gift, and because it looked pretty. And, for the untrained eye, yes. For the trained eye, there are issues, but like I said, so could we grab the things that are working with the sword that make it look kind of prettier and fix it? Make or redesign it to make it 100% functional, yet keep the true core original concept and design of this classic Excalibur sword. And this sword has come up a couple of times in my videos. One of my very early videos, I mentioned some of the errors in it, and I even made a whole video on the concept of Excalibur as to what it would have really looked like. The video's done pretty well, actually, and I'm pretty happy with it, though I feel I could have gone into more detail of the other possible origins for King Arthur, but that wasn't the subject. It was really about Excalibur. And that, with the possible origins of King Arthur, it wouldn't actually be very much looking like a medieval sword. It'd be more Celtic in reality. But King Arthur is a story that was told a lot in the medieval period, and just like with superheroes in our day, when we retell, how many times have we rebooted Spider-Man to bring him more modern to the period of time that currently in during the time of that reboot? That's kind of exactly what they did with the King Arthur. They always brought the story back into what they viewed as a modern time, and and so King Arthur became contemporary to the medieval period. And so with that idea that, Excalibur is a medieval sword, King Arthur being a medieval king and things, this design is one of the most famous and prominent and even iconic designs for Excalibur. If you Google Excalibur, this thing is going to come up, and hence why it's probably appeared in that King Arthur reboot thing. Except what's interesting, even in my reply, people pointed out, Shad, your Excalibur looks way nicer than the one they had in the movie, okay? And granted, it does. This is one of there are many variants on it, and this was one of the nicer ones, yet there are so many problems. There's a smudge on this, which is just bugging the heck out of me, so I'm just going to clean your sword blades, people. I've been handling a bit more recently since the video. The whole thing needs a clean. Anyway, so you need to be a bit more informed about what effective and functional sword design is to be able to pick up the because once you're familiar with them, the errors are fairly blatant. You're like, but you can see where they went wrong. And one of the first kind of errors in this kind of design for this sword is they wanted to make it look bigger, so it looks nice and impressive, hanging on your wall and things. Yet traditionally, Excalibur is a one-handed arming sword, but then they've just kind of increased the scale. The crossguard is its own issue. There's a lot to talk about in regards to the crossguard, but because of that, this is no longer a one-handed sword. Its dimension, this is very much now what you would class as a bastard sword. Bastard sword is an interesting definition. It's a sub-classification of longsword, which means every bastard sword is technically a longsword, but not every longsword is a bastard sword. And this is a modern kind of definition because the term bastard sword, at certain times in the past, was simply used to refer to as longswords. And the term longsword in English wasn't even used to more predominantly refer to the swords that we identify as longswords. So two-handed swords or bastard swords was the term, usually, but there is Langschwert in the Germanic areas of the medieval period that referred to longsword, so there's the longsword there, but that's translation. So it's a very interesting kind of thing. And also, by the way, bastard sword, there's another historical definition and use of the term that we don't use in the modern day, which is quite prominent, and it was used to refer to a sword in which you didn't know who made it. The manufacturer, okay, the craftsman. And if there was no maker's mark or anything like that, it would be referred to as a bastard sword, and it's quite easy to understand because its parentage was questionable. You didn't know where it came from, hence bastard. So that was actually, if you're writing stories and things like that, there's a really cool, interesting use of the term bastard sword. Yet in the modern day, bastard sword specifically refers to a hand-and-a-half sword. A sword that can be used in one hand, but has the length of handle to use two. The interesting thing about the weight and proportions of this is that this would be a nightmare to use in one hand because it's so darn heavy and cumbersome. And this is the next big error with this sword's design, but it's more common and prominent with the wall hanger category because it's not meant to be functional, and it's that basically no distal taper. It doesn't get thinner towards the tip here, which means it's insanely top heavy. This thing is more cumbersome and awkward to wield than my two-handed longsword is actually made to be used in two hands. Like seriously, even holding this one-handed right here, my proper longsword, it is actually more nimble than this thing, which is, but you could say, is it meant to actually be, a one-handed sword at all? Traditionally, yes. This one, because it's got such a long handle, is it meant to be a solid two-handed? But even there, gosh, so common. So there is a lot of problems with the blade, which makes it way too over heavy, and you could reduce them a lot. Like for instance, if you added a nice fuller, that would take off a good third of the weight of the blade, a good solid full go, maybe not third, maybe fourth, okay, quarter. So that would do wonders. And then a distal taper, all right? Suddenly you could make the blade proportions so much better. Then we come to the hilt and handle. And to help us out in this analysis to try and fix the issues, the problems with this sword, well, I have made a 3D model to show what this should look like if it was designed to be functional, keeping all the, elements and styles of the design, the shape, true. I can actually keep most of the shape the same by tweaking and improving a lot of key elements, so it's very much looks like the same sword, yet it would be functional, okay, because it's salvageable. This design has some interesting kind of potential. It could actually look like a really cool sword if you could make it functional. So I measured this sword, centimeters and everything like that, and I reproduced it in, SketchUp 3D as a 3D model, so we can get a really good close-up turnaround, and I can also give a really good comparison. And wow, like the thing that stands out to you most when you are a bit more familiar with functional sword design is the width of this crossguard. This is such a chunky, cumbersome crossguard, and this is probably the biggest thing that unfunctional swords get wrong. And on the note of like functional versus unfunctional, there is this Puritan side of me that is even reluctant to call this a real sword, because a real sword is meant to be functional, and this is clearly not functional. It's a wall hanger, so it's not a real sword. It's metal, okay? It's a sword in the sense that it's a sword. It's not a real sword, though. Some people have said you could call it sword-like objects, which is, I guess there are many different types of swords, and this is a fake sword, a wall hanger sword. All right, so looking at the crossguard. With fantasy swords and wall hangers, like I mentioned, that's the biggest thing that they usually get wrong. Way too big. And what's crazy about this crossguard, right? Compare it to, let's look at my longsword, for instance. I can't hold this one by the blade because it's actually sharp, but take a look at the crossguards right here, okay? If it's going to focus. Have a look at the difference in width. Like, it's a bit crazy. This crossguard is probably 10 times the mass of this one right here. Therefore, like way more weight as a result. Now, this crossguard on this longsword is a very minimalistic style crossguard. You can have them a bit bigger, and you have kind of two planes to work with. What am I referring to here? Well, if you want to increase the size of this crossguard and still keep it in a functional range, okay, you could increase it lengthways while still keeping it thin, or you could keep it flat and make it thicker, like that. And so we kind of see this on other crossguards. Take a look at my arming sword here. So this is my arming sword, right? And the crossguard is very thin. I'll just put my longsword down. So it is flat along here. See, very thin, but if I turn it on the side and look here, that's got a bit of width. Now, the reason why it needs to be so wide there is to accommodate for the width of the handle. So the crossguard on this sword here actually has the exact same width as the handle to go in line with it. Now, usually that's what you need to do, but there are ways to make a crossguard even a bit thinner than the girth of the handle looking at it from the side. And that's what they've actually done with this longsword right here. If I turn it on the side and you have a look at it, in fact, I'll even get a bit closer to the camera so I can get a really good close-up. The width of the crossguard is actually thinner than the width of the handle itself, even on this plane, okay? So when I say this is a minimalistic crossguard, very much so. They've pushed it to the limit to reduce the weight as much as possible to get this to be an insanely beautiful, nimble sword, and it really is. So to make this sword actually functional, we're going to need to reduce the bulkiness of this crossguard as much as possible. But we don't want to ruin its design, because on the face of the crossguard it has these beautiful designs, dragons, and it looks like a griffin or something. It's like a birdie thing there, but there's some flowers. It's just got some really nice patterns, and you need that surface area to display the imagery. So we can only reduce the actual face, right, the width on it, this, by going down only so much. Otherwise, there won't be room for the imagery. So the direction or angle that we need to reduce is going to be its width on this angle, okay? We're going to make it thin as possible. Now, this is actually done on historical swords. There are certain styles of crossguards that actually have a decent amount of surface area on the flat end, but that's because they're so thin on the side angle. So if you look at, say, the gallows glass style sword, see the classic kind of crossguards on those swords. All right, you can see what they're doing there. They even have holes sometimes punched into the sides to again reduce the weight even further. Now, you can go too far, because if you make it way too thin here, you'll actually have this, it could bend under any measure of stress if someone hits it really hard. But what's interesting about this design, it has a raised ridge that actually runs all around the edge as a type of border. And you can actually use that structurally in the same way that we do with an I-beam. So we can keep these parts, the actual border, thicker than the inside, and have it function as a type of I-beam, which will actually maintain its structure and rigidity quite a lot while reducing the weight dramatically. And what's also good about this is that we can keep the border, see this border here, the same width as the handguard, but have the inside part of the crossguard much thinner than even the width of the handle right there, and reduce the weight even further. So if we have a look at the 3D model and we replace the original crossguard with my redesigned version, we have actually reduced the weight dramatically. And in fact, I would say this is a very functional kind of design. The width of the crossguard now at the ends is 1 millimeter. And of course, the border is thicker, which gives it more structure and strength, but the weight has been reduced dramatically. And even in the actual fattest part of it, it's still been reduced, and I've reduced the height of it a little bit. There's still enough surface area to get the imagery in. And so now we've actually made this, kind of crossguard design way more functional. Let's replace the blade. Fuller on the blade. The ricasso does not need to be so long, okay? This has a ridiculously long ricasso, almost to the point where you could actually strike someone right here where it's blunt. And you don't want that. You want blade, even if you can strike, further up the blade like that. So we make the ricasso about yay big, replace that on our 3D model, and we are making progress already. These are massive improvements, yet it is clearly and distinctly the same sword. Now we come to the handle. Excalibur traditionally is a one-handed sword, yet this one is, definitely has the length for a hand-and-a-half sword. So it puts me in a bit of a rock and a hard place. If I want to keep, stay true to the proportions that this one has and length that it has, the classic famous Excalibur wall hanger, well, I would keep it as a hand-and-a-half, but actually design it to be more functionally representative of a hand-and-a-half sword, especially with the shape of the handle. But at the same time, Excalibur is meant to be an arming sword, so I'll do both. I will give it a one-handed, handle length and a hand-and-a-half handle length, showing different types, because it's interesting when you actually have a look at one-handed swords. When it comes to one-handed arming swords, handle length has some room to move, and so they can actually be even shorter than this. Like when you look at some of the Viking period swords, Anglo-Saxon ones, like the hand gets really jammed in there, and the pommel, this handle can even be about 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, even more narrow than this, and this is pretty narrow. Now I have an good old rolling synthetic one, and it's just a good, one-handed sword to represent the longer kind of handle room that you have. And this is not a bastard sword, okay? The handle is clearly a one-handed handle length, yet there is a lot more room, okay? So if you compare these two swords right here, see the length of handle difference? And so right here, there's a lot more room to move on the handle, which also helps out if I had a big thick gauntlet on and I needed more room to have my hand on there. And so with Excalibur, because if we're going to go with the old school style kind of Excalibur style sword, I would give it a handle similar to the one, my actual arming sword. Something about this length works really well, but if we're scaling this down to the size of an arming sword, we need to scale everything else down to match, because the crossguard is according to conventional design, too long for arming sword length, and the pommel, you can actually kind of keep the same. Pummels is interesting. They can get fairly big, and I do love me a big pummel. And the pummel, you don't need to change too much in regards to this design. It could be hollow, all right? So if it's too heavy and adding too much weight, just make it hollow. You can make it partially hollow, so it still acts as a good, effective counterbalance. So you've got room to move there, and the pummel isn't too much of an issue. So this would be the arming sword version of the functional Excalibur, classic Excalibur design, or the classic Excalibur wall hanger. But if we wanted to keep it in the same proportions and make it a hand-and-a-half sword, as this one technically is, well, interestingly, we would give it the handle that's shaped and appropriate to a bastard sword, which is a nice kind of lower midrib. It's not actually in the middle, because it's only meant to keep, a half handle afterwards which then kind of narrows in quite neatly, and it looks really nice. Yeah, it just looks really, really good. But that's it, okay? These are the two functional versions of the, classic Excalibur wall hanger, and have a look. Have a look at the difference, right? It has still got the shape, and it is very recognizably the same design, but made functional, okay? It's thin, all right, on the side here. The crossguard is not overbuilt, and so there you go. I like this design. It could be redeemed, but, you know, there were issues with it, and one of the fun things why I even made this video is that by going through this process, by correcting the problems, by fixing this, being able to point out interesting elements of sword design in the process. So now, someone just needs to make it. I certainly can't. Anyway, so here we go. Has it been redeemed? Has this design, or the original one, no, still matched the problems, but we were able to work with it and make it better, I think. As to what I will do with this one, I still have a soft spot, you know, for it. It's got some pretty elements to it, but man, Excalibur, he roasted me so bad. It's actually, I have a different sword hanging there. Hanging there now. Can you see that? It's my Witcher LARP one, and it's probably like I've decided it's safer to just have foam ones here. But anyway, so there we go. We've redeemed it. The Excalibur sword fixed. I hope you've enjoyed, and thank you for watching. I hope to see you again. And until then, farewell.